we lost around 71 lives, and these were young people, school-going children as well, have lost their lives. The social media ban actually did ignite a spark, but it was also a reflection of huge, deep-set resentment towards the government, which was basically corrupt. It was time that we needed change. And you can see these kids of politicians living out their lifestyle with Gucci, Prada, Balenciaga, while the rest of the population is really struggling to even have a decent meal on the table, even have a decent health system that works, even have basic of necessity that human rights principle says that a human being should have. It is basically a movement of youth, a peaceful protest actually, to voice out against corruption. I think this year alone, we have had around 10 high-profile cases of corruption, and we wanted transparency, government to be accountable, basically follow through the principles of good governance.
Okay, listeners, we're doing something different. I haven't focused that much on Nepal. I've been trying to study up to be a worthy interlocutor for you, but could you introduce yourself to the listeners first? Tell them who you are and what you're doing.
Hello everyone. I am Prashant Sarmal. I am a law graduate and currently a master's student of human rights and democratization under Global Campus of Human Rights, the Asia Pacific program. Basically that would be my introduction. So yeah.
And you're from Nepal and living in
Yes.
Nepal, correct?
Yes. Exactly.
And quite a time to be a student of democratization in Nepal's history. I mean, Nepal's democracy is extremely young, is my understanding, really only transitioned in 2008. So are you focusing specifically on Nepal's democratic transition, or are you studying democratization more broadly in the Asia Pacific?
Academically, we are studying more about democratization broadly, but of course, like when you study it in the books and when you see it in reality, obviously you can see the differences, you can see the nuances, you can see the loopholes, and everything. So quite an interesting moment at this point of time. Yeah.
I mean, super interesting. And you're also, I mean, you're at a very interesting age, which is you're probably young enough to remember Nepal before the democratic transition, and then sort of, old enough to have some memories of the transition in '08. And it's not like Nepalese politics have been particularly stable since then. You've had multiple, as young
Yeah.
democracies usually do, and now you have these most recent protests. So, I mean,
Mhm.
the level of political change in your own lifetime must, I mean, does it just feel normal, or does it feel kind of all over the place and
I
volatile?
mean, I grew up during Maoist insurgency, so I grew up with a lot of curfews imposition by the government, a lot of like tires burning, bomb blasts, schools getting closed, getting promoted to another grade without giving you exams, right? And finally, with the establishment of new constitution and with the election in 2015, we were hopeful. We were like, okay, we had got some sort of stability, but then for the international world, Nepal had gained some sort of stability, but for the insiders, we still had, um, big players, inter-party politics, which was quite unstable, is still unstable, and a lot of corruption. So I grew up seeing a lot of instability, yes, and I don't know where we are headed right now. So yeah.
I guess that's a good place to start. So, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on
Hmm.
is because I don't think most of the people who listen to this podcast are familiar with Nepal. I would be impressed if 50% of them could spot Nepal on a map. Sorry, listeners, if you're smarter than that, like I'll give you all the benefit of the doubt. And also, I mean, it was even sort of perfect. Like the day that the revolution happened in Nepal, for about 2 or 3 hours in Western media, it was dominating. And it was a big deal. I mean, we got the pictures of the parliament building burning and like the crazy videos of the ministers being beaten in the street and everything else. And then literally like 3 or 4 hours into this catching on Western media, Israel started bombing Qatar. And it was like all the
Yeah.
media just shifted. And it's like, oh, like we're on the Israel Qatar thing. And we've been on the Israel Qatar thing for weeks. And everybody forgot about Nepal unless you were seeking out information.
Uh-huh.
So just sort of this forgotten away place. So I guess the first thing is, could you just situate Nepal for a listener who's not that familiar with it? Like we've talked a little bit about the 2008 transition, 2015 revolution, but
Yeah.
you're a landlocked country. The typical
Yeah,
Western strategy thing is, oh, sandwiched between
it's not
China
good.
and India, and China and India are going to move the chess pieces, and is China behind this, or is India behind the, like, can you just talk about why is Nepal transitioning to democracy late? Like, what about Nepal has created this instability right now? Is there something particular? Is there something happening? Like,
I really don't think it's transitioning into democracy late.
mm,
I don't think so. We first to start, Nepal was never colonized, so we were never under the British rule. We had monarch regime throughout our life. So our democracy for us was removing the monarch or establishing a constitutional monarchy, which happened a bit later, and and then later in 2015, as far as I understand, we overthrew the even the constitutional monarchy from our government, right? So the sovereignty of the country was later vested into the people. That's what the 2015 constitution did. And being a landlocked country, yes, Nepal is situated between these like superpowers of the world, Nepal, India, and China. Currently, they are like economically booming. But if you look at our own country, we have unemployment rates, people migrating to other countries every day to get employment for and struggling for basic survival. So geopolitics plays a huge role in Nepal's politics, and also like the leaders we've had over the decade of time have been influenced by we can't deny that they have been influenced by India's politics um, or any other international, I don't know, external sources. So yeah.
mm-hmm. um, yeah, and there's so many things to break apart here, and it's not like violence is strange in the Nepalese political context. I mean, I was reading about the massacre of the royal family back in
Yeah.
2000, and before I read anything about it, I said, oh, maybe this was maybe the population rose up and wanted to get rid of them. Is this like Russia in the 1900s? And no, it's a crown prince who, for unknown motives, just like killed the entire family and then killed him
But before
uncle.
you say that,
Please,
we
please tell me.
haven't really had official investigation and official document blaming the crown prince. So we can't
Mm,
really prove anything, right? So when I was, I think, about 1 years old when that happened. So I don't really remember much of it. But I remember most of the people they considered monarchs as representation of the god for Nepali people. That's what
mhm.
the symbol of monarchy was. But over the time, it has changed a lot. People have understood they need of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and a lot of other economic social rights, and that has reflected into our constitution as well, current constitution. So yes, but we're very I think we're very peaceful people, and what you saw in the media was the aftermath, the destruction of the ministry Singapore, the leaders getting beaten up. It was the aftermath of the violence that took place after the peaceful protest, which I was also part of. It was
Mm,
basically a movement of youth, a peaceful protest actually, to voice out against corruption. We have had decades. I think this year alone, we have had around 10 high profile cases of corruption, and we wanted transparency, government to be accountable, basically follow through the principles of good governance. That's what we wanted. And during that protest, there was shooting, I think, around we lost around 71 lives,
mm.
and these were young people, school going children as well, have lost their lives. So that was, I think, people's anger and resentment towards the government that was being shown in the TV, in the Western media regarding the violence. But also, there is a question regarding whether the protest was really the violence that you saw was really a youth-led movement, or were really Gen Z protesters who identified themselves as Gen Z protesters were part of it, and whether a vigilante group, or if any, even the youth coalition of political parties had any hand on it. So yeah.
I mean, that's fascinating too, because I mean, I wonder if you follow the Western media narratives about this, because to the extent that the West was covering this, at least the English language media I saw made it very much about a ban that the
Social
Nepalese
media
government
ban.
imposed on
Hmm.
social media, and that was the thing that kicked off the protest. But what you're describing is actually something much more deep seated, that it's a
Hmm.
longer term dissatisfaction about corruption, and that you
Hmm.
wouldn't ascribe it necessarily to the social media ban. So how do we square those things? Like, do you think the social media ban helped spark something? Is it irrelevant and Western reporters are just looking for something to pin it on? Is it really a movement against corruption in general? Like, how do we think about the
I think it
impetus
was
for
it,
these
it
movements?
ignited a spark. The social media ban actually did ignite a spark. What it did was, like, people, because in this generation you can easily go on TikTok, or you can easily go on social media and find these, like, kids of politicians, for example, living a lavish lifestyle while the rest of the
Mm.
population is really struggling to even have a decent meal on the table, even have a decent health system that works, even have I don't know, basic of necessity that human rights principle says that a human being should have. And you can see these kids of politicians really, like, living out their lifestyle with Gucci, Prada, Balenciaga, right? So that really ignited a spark, and we cannot deny that social media played a huge role. A social media ban played a huge role because it was taking away people's right to freedom of speech. It was taking away people's right to express themselves, right? So that also played a huge part, but it was also a reflection of huge deep set resentment with the government, which was basically corrupt. And it was time that we needed change.
Hmm. That's so interesting, because I mean, obviously, social media affects different societies in different ways. Like young
Hmm.
people in the West, and especially when you're, and I actually spoke about this on a podcast a couple episodes ago. Like, people are looking at social media and becoming depressed about their own lives because they're not living up to some ideal. You're actually describing something very different, which is people are looking at social media and being like, "Screw these guys! Like, we're not living like this. Let's like make some change, because this is not normal, and everybody should experience our thing." So it's a very interesting inversion. Um, well, sort of another question, usually, and not always, but usually when you get political unrest, like what you just experienced in Nepal, you have issues like corruption and you have sparks like the social media ban. But usually underpinning that is economic dysfunction or economic
Exactly.
malaise.
Hmm.
And the top down data doesn't look terrible. Like, there was some higher inflation in Nepal last year, but for the last couple of months, inflation's actually been relatively muted. I'm sure unemployment is not where Nepalese people want it to be. For youth, I think the rate was somewhere like 22%. But there are many countries that have youth unemployment at that level and aren't
Hmm.
overthrowing their government and
Hmm.
doing the things that Nepal did. So what is the economic experience on a day-to-day level? Like, is the data not showing us that there was actually significant strain this year for the normal Nepalese citizen? Is it something more about young people just don't see opportunities going forward, and that's why they were the ones leading the charge? Help me with the economic situation and whether the data is lying to us.
Okay, I mean, if we look at the Nepali scenario, Nepali society scenario, there are people who live in, like, lavish mansions, like they have had generational wealth and they have had opportunities, but there are also people who struggle to make day-to-day ends meet, right? There is, like, we cannot be centralized. I am from Kathmandu. I live in a city. So I have had the privilege of going to a boarding school, having access to health system, having access to easy access to public transportation. But that is not the reality of most of the youth living across the nation. Nepal is just not Kathmandu, so I cannot be Kathmandu centric and look at the scenario. And
Hmm.
yes, we have businessmen whose products get supplied all over the world. For example, the Chaudhary Group, YY. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a instant noodle. So it's really famous in Nepal, and it's famous in India, and I think
Yeah.
it's famous within the South Asian community as well. And we have had these wealthy families, but there is really a divide between the economic status of people. You can clearly see that if you come to Kathmandu, and you can find someone like also one of the things that you we need to point out is the leadership of the political scenario or the governance system in the country has been run by just selected few people. So it was against that as well. We don't really see fresh faces or new faces, although relatively over past few years we've seen those faces, but people who run the government really don't want to leave their chair or give chance to younger generation. They've been sat there for, I think they overthrew the monarchy, but then they're being sat at the same place. They don't give someone else the chance, the opportunity to come forward, to move forward. So I think that that frustration was also reflected in this constitution, because especially like these three leaders, Prachanda, Oli, and Sherbabadeva, these three people had been in the post running the government, and we couldn't really see like it was a coalition government, of course, and we couldn't really see the young people could not really see their faces reflected in the government anymore. So that was also the dissatisfaction that young people had over their government.
Yeah, if you're also looking at, I cherry picked some data. I talked about inflation, unemployment. I mean, one thing that has happened is that there's been significant devaluation of, the Nepalese rupee. Like on the dollar, if you're looking back to 2010, like the purchasing power on the dollar is roughly down by 50%. If you look at it just since 2021, like purchasing power is down significantly as well, which leads into another sort of question. I know that, and I wanted to ask from the Gen Z experience, because if it's Gen Z, and if they're like Gen Z in any other parts of the world, and if they're dealing with a government they don't trust and that is corrupt, and a currency that is losing its value, and some of these other issues, I mean, that's a recipe for embracing cryptocurrencies, and especially Bitcoin. And if you look at, Bhutan is in the neighborhood, they've become this Bitcoin mining paradise, whereas Nepal banned everything to
Hmm.
do with cryptocurrency in 2017. So I wanted to ask, well, it's sort of a twofold question. Like, is there that sense, that lack of confidence in Nepal's currency also? And then among Gen Z, is there a wish to like unconstrain themselves and to embrace Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, like some countries in the region with massive hydropower potential or geothermal potential has? Or is that not really on the mind of the people quite yet?
I mean, um, I think yes, for the majority of Gen Z, we want to move with the times. I mean, most of our friends are abroad, they're living in the US or Australia. They've invested in like crypto, bitcoins, but we legally can't pursue those things living in our own country. And there are other, like, we want to open our market, but at the same time, I don't know how to say this, like conserve or preserve our own integrity as well. I
Hmm.
mean, in a sense that um, we have traditional values, we want to preserve it, we want to conserve it, but at the same time, we realize the necessity to move forward with the time and also take advantage of globalization, urbanization, and the like moving forward of social media and information and technology. So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
you're describing. It's funny. You're describing, and correct me if I'm wrong. And obviously, this is your point of view. Like, I'm sure that Nepal's Gen Z is as diverse as any other
yeah,
Gen Z in
exactly.
any other
Yeah,
country.
yeah,
But you're talking about a society that is fundamentally conservative. I
yeah,
say that with a small c, which makes sense for a country that was never colonized, which until 2001 had a royal family, which is wrestling, between these things about openness in general. Um, Okay, well, let's maybe get into a little bit with the political transition. You did not seem overly optimistic when we started talking about this earlier in the episode. Are you optimistic about what has happened? Do you think there is some durability to the current transition? Do you think that the older woman that they appointed as prime minister, is she just a caretaker? Is she handing the baton to somebody else? Like, what do you have hope for the future over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 years? I know that's an impossible question, but tell me how you're feeling.
See, Gen Z was anyone, like for me, Gen Z obviously signifies a generation born from 1997 to 2012. That's there, right? But Gen Z for me was also someone who supported good governance, supported human rights, supported moving forward with the time and not being conservative, and also supported accountability and transparency. Gen Z was someone who stood firmly within these principles and worked for the betterment of not just themselves, but also for the society as a whole. That was
Mhm.
Gen Z for me. And the person we've appointed, uh, the she was chief judge of the Supreme Court before, and she was the first female chief judge of Nepal. So obviously, there's a question whether it is a feminist win, considering we cannot see the intersectionality within her appointments or within, like, because she belongs to basically upper caste Brahmin um, hierarchy of the society. So obviously there is that debate. But the person we've appointed, I think we've appointed her because she firmly stands for these principles. She has spoken against the corruption of the government countless of times. She has stood up for, like, she has asked accountability from the government countless of times. So that's why we've appointed her. And if not hopeful, what else can I be? I'm going to ask you this question. If not hopeful, what else can I be? What choice do I have? I mean, I don't
Yeah,
really
well,
have another choice.
I guess I mean, that's a fair question to throw back in my face, but let me ask it to you a different way. I mean, you're a graduate student finishing up graduate studies. Are, is it your plan to stay in Nepal? Is it your hope that you will find a
That's
job elsewhere and get out of Nepal?
that is why I came back. That is why I came back. That was one of the reason. If I wanted to stay somewhere else, I could have stayed, but my upbringing was not that. My upbringing was, you need to come back. You need to contribute to the society. You have this qualification. You are a law student at the same time. I've studied human rights, so I think that's why I came back. That's why majority of the people who joined also were people who chose to stay back and chose to do something in the country, and even like start their business on social media. And with social media ban, it was like, oh my God, how am I going to survive now? Because I wanted to stay here.
I mean, what do you hope to do in Nepal? Like, do you hope to be a lawyer? Do you hope to work in the government? Like, what are your aspirations?
Yeah, I think I want to work for the government in the near future, but also I am open to opportunities. I want to explore more like international opportunities within my own country and ensure that, um, because ensure that the narrative does not get twisted when it comes to Nepal and Nepal's population and what we want and what we believe in, and ensure that we do believe in universality, but we also have our own particularity. If that makes sense to you,
It
right?
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's in some ways a perfect segue to the question of, I always have to bring it back to geopolitics a little bit. And I
Hmm.
alluded to this early in our conversation. I mean, you are stuck between China and India. So any
Yeah.
smaller state that is stuck between two great powers, like as much as you want to resist, I mean, we sort of have to talk about the two elephants in the room, or the elephant or the dragon in the room. And you're talking about international opportunities for Nepal. So from your perspective, What are those relations like, and what do those relations look like in the future? I'll give you. I think there's a very simplistic Western narrative that says that China wants to expand and that it views extending influence in Nepal as a way to maybe push back in a balance of power game against India. The same thing can be said the opposite way, that there's Tibet in China and that's something that maybe India can push on, and then Nepal becomes this flashpoint. That's always seemed simplistic to me, but I'm obviously not on the ground. So when you're thinking about internationalization, the first two countries you're going to be thinking about are India and
India and
China.
China. Yeah.
How do you think about them? Are they involved in any of this? Like, are they just sort of bystanders? And how do you see the future relations with those two countries?
I mean, we cannot deny the influence of both the governments into our politics, right? Uh, as of, I think, KP Oli's government supported one China policy, which was also inclusion of Tibet. So it did not really believe Tibet was an autonomous state. Um, but we, over the years, if you look at it, Oli's government, what it did was it took a stand in a sense that we've always had border related issues with both these countries. Ever since, I think it was, we have to go back to Indo China war, Indo Sino war conflict. So Nepal, during the Oli government, released what we call pointed map, which included this like areas called Limpiadhura, Lipulek, and Kalapani, which the Indian government had also included in the two their own map. So we have had conflict over that, and this was ever since, like, we can go back to go regarding this issue. We have to go back to like the treaty that Nepal did with the British government. Nepal was much more bigger than it currently is in the world map. So after that 1914's treaty, which we call Sugalit Treaty, Nepal lost its territory in the west and also in the east. So after that, the area has been in a very area is in a very conflicting situation, whether it's Nepal's or whether it's India's. It's in question, but some historians say that we have proof that it is Nepal's, and it still remains Nepal. And there has been, like, we have had joint commissions whose report never got published because governments refused to acknowledge those reports. So we have had that. But what we need to realize, I think, at the end of the day, as a law student, as also a human rights student, even this Montevideo Convention states that, in Article 1 says that it's not just a territory that makes a country, it's also the population. So I think if we are to decide about the nationality, or if we are to take into the accounts of the governance structure, we need to really look into the population. We really need to get their opinion in this. And yeah, I think that's the basic scenario of geopolitics. And obviously, we say that Nepal is protected from China from the mountains, but we have also had claims in the history. If you look back at it, that China also claimed that Sagarmatha was theirs, Mount Everest was theirs, but obviously they don't, like, they got dissuaded from those arguments. But we also had argument over the length of the Mount Everest, apparently, but it got solved with the joint discussion. So whatever it is, whatever decision we take, I think we need to take consideration of the people living in the area, or like the site.
Yeah, this is history that I mean, I don't know this history well, and I do politics for a living. So I'm actually like reading a book about the East India Company right now, and I have not gotten to the 19th century yet. I'm still in the 18th century. So a lot of it is about, both English interactions with the Indian government and the decline of the Mughal Empire, and also sort of French involvement there. But I am sort of aware that down the road, the East India Company starts to really value the notion of Nepal and specifically its commodities like its gold and its timber and other things. And to your point that there is a sort of Anglo-Nepalese war there.
Yeah.
I was, as you were talking, I was just looking up a map of Greater Nepal, and I was not aware of just how much territory Nepal has lost over the
Yeah.
time period. That there is this sort
Mhm.
of movement of Greater Nepal. Are there? I mean, this is like a weird question to ask somebody who studies human rights for a living, but like, is there a sense of irredentism? Is there a sense of like Nepal has lost something and that Nepal needs to gain back through strength, and that comes from strengthening the Nepalese government, or is there just sort of acceptance that no, like we're not going backwards in time, like we have to build with what we have, even if we have lost these things. I mean, it's very common for a country or state that is as proud as the one that you're describing to want to put the old like borders back together again. Is there any of that? Am I reaching?
Um, y- I mean, I wouldn't deny that people with that concept do not exist, but also I think the majority of the population, if you look at the video of a famous YouTuber who was here during the revolution, you can see that people were offering him water even during the protest, safeguarding his way, even offering ways to the tourist bus and stopping their protest in the middle. So we are really peaceful people. I don't think we really think about extending our territory. Rather than, I think we should think about preserving what we have. And at this current moment, I think it is necessary for us to, because Nepal recently got into a federal structure. We hadn't really had that. We didn't have that in our history. So most of the development that happened, and that, and this is where we saw negative consequences of urbanization as well, is because of centralization. So we really have to currently focus on decentralizing the authority or the power so that development of infrastructure, development as a whole, sustainable development takes place across Nepal, not just Kathmandu. Kathmandu is just one city of the entire Nepal. We have so many other things that we need to explore, we need to do, rather than just focusing on one particular city of the country. So yeah.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about China and India. I also want to put this in a little bit of even broader perspective in South Asia, because Indonesia is currently, I mean, has a lot of populist protests
Mhm.
against a government that is starting to crack down a little bit. It'll be really interesting to see if Prabowo, their current leader, who was rehabilitated, was associated with the former military dictatorship and seems to be arguing for an increased role of the military in Indonesian politics. Which, I mean, the last time we saw that movie in Indonesia didn't go particularly well. Last summer, we could have been talking about Bangladesh and the overthrow of Bangladesh's leader, and Bangladesh is also still in a period of transition. Would you resist the notion that some have put out that there is some kind of South Asian spring, sort of an allusion to the Arab Spring of 2010, that there's some political consciousness within South Asia that is rising in the context of all the different changes that are happening in the world? Or to your point, is this about particularity? Is this about no, like Indonesia's far away and it's doing its own thing, and Bangladesh, okay, like maybe there's some related issues, but they're doing their own thing, and Nepal's really doing their own thing? Do you see any connections between unrest in these three countries, or would you associate it to particularity, in your words, in all three?
You see a lot of similarity between South Asian nations, and obviously, I think these are, if you look at it, obviously, uh, Indonesia is far away, but if you look at the current world, it has become really smaller. Social media has made us really a small country. And I think the education level or the consciousness within the people, because of the education level and also because of globalization and also the spread of, I don't know, social media and the consciousness, the political debates, people have easy access to these kind of conversations about discourse on politics as well, right? So I think that has also helped, but also, yes, there is some sort of universality, and there is some. I cannot deny that there is some sort of universal pattern or a pattern going on within this region, but also there is some sort of particularity in Nepal's protest, c- especially because it was not an institutional protest. It was not led by a particular institution or a particular the protest that especially when it comes to Gen Z's protest. It was not an institutional protest. It was not led by one individual or one political party. It was basically um, youth against the corruption, youth against the government. It was just a mass consciousness that happened over the time, I think. Yeah, that sets it quite different from other kind of revolution that happened.
Well, and also to your point, I mean, it's sort of unfair of me to pose the question about Bangladesh and Indonesia because those are primarily Muslim countries, and Nepal
Mhm.
is a primarily Hindu country. So maybe the correct question, or not the correct, but maybe a more interesting question would be to ask you what your sentiments are towards the current government of India, which has very clearly turned Hindu nationalist, which has, yeah, I mean, turned its back in some sense on cosmopolitanism within the Indian context. And Narendra Modi really does represent this notion of a Hindu
Hindutva.
Rashtra, and like his job
Mhm.
is to lead that. Is that admired in Nepal? Is Nepal Hindu but secular? I know that in the interim constitution, secularism is firmly enshrined, but is are people in Nepal looking at India and seeing, a Hindu nationalist who wants to get rid of red tape and make India more powerful and more economically open and all these other things? Like, is that something that's attractive, or is that like that's great for India, but it's not great for us? Like, we have our own brand here.
I mean, you need to look at it. You need to also understand the Hinduism that Hinduism in Nepal is considerably different from Hinduism that's practiced in India. Yes, we worship the same gods. Yes, we worship we have similar festivals, but we've always had this secular notion of secularity. For example, I'll give you this example. Like we have a festival called Dashay, which is primarily a Hindu festival where goddess Durga is worshipped. But it is also celebrated by community which isn't primarily Hindu. They don't necessarily put red vermilion tika, but they put white tika instead of red vermilion on their forehead. So we have had this sense of this notion of secularity even before. And if you look at the temples around in Nepal, you can find Buddha's statue, you can find even Buddhists going to temples, you can find mosque in the one direction, you can find a temple, and you can find a church in the same alley. So that's quite interesting, and it's especially when it comes to, because I'm so sorry. I talked about not being Kathmandu centric before, but I am being Kathmandu centric currently. You can see like really see the mixture of Buddhism. You can see mixture of Hinduism at the same time. So I like, for me, I didn't really grow up with this kind of separation. But yes, we have like pro-monarchist party which wholeheartedly support the mission of Hindutva just to establish monarchy, because Hinduism, like Hindus, see kings as a symbol of God Narayan. So I think that's the logic. That's why we might have people who are like pro Modi or pro like whatever he's doing is really good. But um, although like, but this sense of this notion of secularism within the country was already there in a sense that uh, in a sense that like people needed to be unified for the nation, but to show one face. And obviously, the government or the leaders who were the top were primarily Hindus. I don't deny it. Or and they promoted those values. But if you look at the cultural practices, we were secular. And some might obviously disagree with me, and they're free to disagree with that. But yes, and like as someone who has studied history and where religion, like Nepal went through phases of regime where we also had non-Hindu rulers as the head of nations. So that also influences Nepal's spiritual or Nepal's religious or political journey, or whatever you may call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to resist asking you the impossible question, and instead ask you one that hopefully reflects our conversation a bit more, and ask, um, if we were talking a year from now on September 18th, 2026, where do you hope Nepal will be based on the current political transition? And the question I want to ask is, where do you think we will be? But I don't know that anybody knows that. But what do you hope will be in a year from now?
So the government has already decided on the election date. Election date has already been announced. I hope that parties that exist, like main political parties within the Nepal, actually see their mistakes from this, and acknowledge the wrongdoings that they have done by supporting just particular leaders and not supporting Nepali people. I hope that they put forward new faces, come up with new ideology, restructure their manifestos, and I am hopeful to see new faces in the parliament because we have two houses. It's just that the lower house that's getting dissolved, not the lower house that has been dissolved, not the upper house currently. So I hope to see new faces, and um, I hope that the government that comes into power, can acknowledge and understand the struggle and the complexity of Nepali society, not just being centric to Kathmandu, but um, but of the sentiments of the overall nation, and where no one gets excluded and everybody's opinion gets included, and everybody gets something beneficial out of this I don't know, restructuring of the whole government system.
And the last question I'll ask you, because you've been very generous with your time, and I don't want to take up too much of it. But what didn't I ask you that I should have? Or if there's one thing that you could say to an English-speaking, Western-oriented audience that you want them to know about what's going on in your country, what would it be?
That the Gen Z protest that happened wasn't just about social media. Uh, it was about demanding the government for transparency and accountability. And the government all over the world need to acknowledge the role played by students and especially youth in their in uplifting their country, and also maybe even um, needing the change. And I hope that um, the government all across the world understand the role played by young people into bringing change in the country, and at the same time acknowledge they should be acknowledging the hardships faced by this young population in face of pressure from globalization and science and innovation at the same time. So we need to move forward with the time, I think.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your time. I know you were up early. I know you're staying up late to talk to me. I know you've still got calls to go. Um, I hope that things are more stable here on out. I hope that I don't have to reach out to you and say, "Hey, we need to talk about what the heck is going on in your country again." I hope that you get what you hope for in the next year. But I also hope that if things do go awry, you won't mind if we reach out and listen from you. And otherwise, just good luck. I mean, you've talked a lot about the particularity of Nepal, but there's a lot of universality in what you're talking about in young generations wanting something that is better and being fed up with old sclerotic structures that aren't responding to their wants and needs. Like, that's a story that is well beyond just Nepal. And in some ways, I think like one of my conclusions from listening to you talk is that older generations who don't change with the times and who try and hold on too hard to what was that was coming before, like, underestimate the youth at your own risk. Like, Nepal is showing you that, at least in that country, they weren't willing to go along with it. So thank you so
Yeah.
much for your perspective and time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much.